Welcome to the third episode of GovCast. I'm Isaac, and I'm here with my co-host Felix and Isaac. Today we'll be talking about local housing. We'll be talking with Polly Ruddick, who is the Affordable Housing Manager in Lexington, Kentucky. Welcome everyone to our podcast. So Felix and Isaac, how have you been?
Oh, I've been good. How about you?
I've been well. So, affordable housing is, of course, a problem with everywhere, with houses being more expensive, renting being more expensive. And with some things that in Lexington that they're doing, it's honestly pretty great. Yeah, I've even looked up before how in Lexington the mayor is pushing for a lot more housing for either creating new housing, having loans, or be able to help pay rent just for people to live in houses. And even Mayor Gordon went to the Capitol to discuss her ideas and showed that this is possible to do it.
I know that in Lexington we have lots of issues, especially around affordable housing. Uh, some research showed that from 2019 to 2024, rent prices have surged 47%, which is very large amount.
It makes sense because even if you look at Zillow for the houses, a couple months ago there would probably have been, say, a house for $230,000. It's probably raised up to $270,000. Increased a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like at a certain point, there isn't really much more that you can increase the rent prices because people just can't afford to live, right?
Well, people who can't really afford to live or depend on how things are going because some people are working several jobs just to get by. And with how a lot of people nowadays say that they can't survive and they're not even able to have children, not able to do anything because they don't have the money for it. And it's kind of a little weird how even with all of this, parts of the government does not want the government to help out with citizens paying either rent, getting getting a home loan, whatever that thing is. It hurts to see that that's happening.
Yeah, I know that in Lexington, especially since Mayor Gorton has been elected, there have been a lot of affordable housing projects. By the middle school used to go to, there was an affordable housing project that where they were making an entire apartment complex that had cheaper prices, so people could afford to sustainably live there.
I've also seen even for when it comes to getting loans for getting a house, the state, not state, but the Lexington has been able to give loans to them to be able to pay for houses with a lower interest rate, which is just great for new house buyers because when you, unless you don't, when, for buying your first house, you're broke. You don't got much money. You're either out of college, you're just getting into the housing market, and houses are getting crazy expensive. And if you don't have the money for it, it's hard to get anything. And when you're younger, you don't have that great of a credit score if you want to get a loan from the bank.
A family friend that it took them a while to be able to find a house here after they moved to Lexington from abroad, and they moved away a couple years ago and were recently putting the house up on the market. They put it up, and within a day there were already I think 4 or 5 offers for it. So people are just constantly looking for housing in this area, and it can be very difficult to find housing, especially at a good price, when there are so many people looking for them.
Yeah.
With all the people looking for houses, it's hard to understand how many houses do you need. And luckily for Lexington, they're building houses. They're making sure that because with the growth of houses, with the growth of people coming into the city, the economy's going to grow as well.
Yep.
Because that's going to bring more money in taxes. That's going to bring everything. And we're able to see that from different cities where,
And
as the population grows, everything grows. Because even for a big one for Detroit, how it's not lower now, but when all those companies were coming in for doing cars, people needed jobs, and so that's what happened.
yep.
I think it has also a big effect with the economy, which is great to have. Your thoughts?
Yeah, as Lexington expands, you'll have more people coming in, and I know lots of people already come here to work with jobs that have to do with horses, the equestrian fields. That's a big thing here. But
And it's also different groups of people from Hispanics, and I know we have some of the biggest immigrants in not Lexington but in Kentucky. Because I'm part of Canadian, part of Latino Student Union. I'm seeing that there are so many immigrants that they don't speak a lick of English, and they need help to get from a student's perspective. How can we help these kids to get into more into school and able to understand from the teacher's perspective and the kid's perspective? And that's a big thing, but also that has to do with housing because with more people coming in, we need more housing to occupy those people.
I recently went to a meeting with KRM that helps refugees here in Lexington, and I think across Kentucky. They're setting up offices all over now. But a lot of what they do is help those immigrants set up with houses. And it can be very helpful, especially if you don't speak English very well, to have someone help you through that process and help you understand it better.
Because it's a difficult process, and even if you know English, it's going to be a difficult process either way. And no matter if it's your first house, no matter if it's your 50th house, it's hard to understand how you're going to guy the house, how you're going to do all these different things. You don't know what you're doing until you understand every single part, and you need to understand like, is this a good house I can buy? And with houses increasing, and most likely they'll increase as well with different laws probably passed in the future.
Often it ends up being these houses that are a little cheaper and more easy to afford that end up being in areas with higher crime rates and more violence. And so that's just unfortunate for people who are looking for a nice place to settle down.
It is very unfortunate, and those are some of the houses that people can afford, while the bigger houses are more towards the people with more money instead of looking at people in the higher class instead of lower class. If the government's able to help that lower class get to a better place, that can not just help the people, but also help the economy with bringing in jobs, bringing in bigger jobs, bringing more money into Lexington. Either that's with a company, whatever that thing is, spending more money, that's able to help a lot.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, Isaac, with your 47% increase in rent price statistic, is that of Lexington? Is that a
That was of Lexington.
yeah?
Is that more home rentals or apartment rentals? You know? Because I know for apartments, of course, can be extremely expensive with even where it's going, but also houses can be extremely expensive because it's a house. For landlords, just they can either price whatever they want to, as long as people pay it.
Yeah. And of course, generally, a house will be more expensive even for the landlord to upkeep than just a apartment, because if it's an apartment, then the whole building has its heating system, its water system, etc. So you can have a lot of different people renting, whereas one house has its individual appliances.
Definitely.
So, according to the Affordable Housing Needs Analysis, Lexington has seen a 47% surge in recent. It, I'm sorry, can you pause that? We'll have to go and cut that out. According to the Affordable Housing Needs Analysis, Lexington has seen a 47% surge in rent prices from 2019 to 2014, with the median rent now ranging between $1,200 and $1,250. In the last year alone, rents rose by 8.7%, exacerbating the financial strain on many residents. The report also highlights a critical shortage of housing units, estimating that an additional 22,549 units of all types are needed to meet the current demand.
Oh my God.
It's crazy.
It's a lot of housing units.
It's a lot of housing units. And this is probably not just happening here, but also everywhere. Because even though this is just Kentucky, there's tons of places that are growing as well.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And I mean, I know out west that rent prices can get crazy, right? For everybody. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if there's a housing shortage there, I'm sure there's a housing shortage here, rather. I'm sure there's a housing shortage there as well.
Yeah. I'm really happy with what Mayor Gordon's doing because she's been able to do the mobile housing stuff, and has been able to build houses, establish all these different things. That has been an immense help for all those people. Because I've even seen, even for immigrants that my parents have been friends with, that moved here legally from either Mexico or have been here and just moved from a different state. They've been able to get a house and be comfortable, a newer house, and not newer house in a good neighborhood. But that neighborhood has been funded by the government, which is really nice because I don't think for a lot of that stuff you could really afford without it.
Yeah. Reading this right now, it says that the Affordable Housing Fund has invested $47.5 million helping to build 1,750 new units and preserve about the same number of older units. So
Yeah.
It's able to keep doubling.
Yeah, I mean, preserving old housing, I think, is equally as important as building new housing.
I was reading before how like for damages, even for that, the government help people give money to be able to help them with their houses, either if it's broken or renovating a house, just keep it up to date and have the right security codes, have be able to be safe in their house.
Yeah.
It's impressive what Mayor Gordon's been able to do, and I'm excited to talk to the housing.
yeah, the Affordable Housing Manager, Polly Ruddick, she's been working with the Lexington Fayette Urban County government with housing for a very long time.
Yeah, and affordable housing has been great because it's been able to make sure that in Kentucky that no one is going to be discriminated against when they're going to be buying a house, because that's been able to add in. I believe it was 1968, if I'm reading here, because that's amazing for not having to worry about your race, not being to worry about your nationality, nothing. Yeah. We'll now be talking to the affordable housing manager after this. All right, welcome to our podcast. Could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you chose this career path?
Yeah, so I have been doing kind of human service work since I was in college. I started off working in jails as a pretrial officer and kind of stayed just working with humans, probably at their lowest point. I went from working in jails doing pretrial setting bonds to working in a recovery center with about 110 women that were starting their recovery journey from substance use disorders, and then after that I kind of went into the housing and homelessness. So I have done housing and homelessness stuff for going on a very long time. I will not age myself, but I've been with LFUCG since 2017, and I was their director of the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention for a little over 5 years. I took some time off after the pandemic, and then I kind of transitioned back into doing affordable housing. So it's a little background about me.
In your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges facing the housing market today?
So there's a lot of challenges that we face. I think in the affordable housing realm, in rental housing, we have seen a very quick uptick. Some data will say that it's 47% increases in rent in a very short period of time, 1, 2, 3 years, really since we came out of the pandemic in 2021, 2022. And, when you talk about that kind of spike in a rental market, wages don't ever keep up with that. I didn't get a 40% increase in my pay since 2021, 2022. Would love for that to happen, but that didn't. And I don't think it happened for a lot of people, but yet their rent increased. And so right now we're kind of dealing with the fact that we used to find one bedroom efficiencies for $550, $600. That was kind of the going rate, and now some of our quote unquote affordable one bedrooms are close to $1,000. So if you think of somebody on a fixed income like SSI or SSDI, some of those folks only get $750, $800 a month. How can you pay 30% of your income on housing that you can actually afford to live, but yet you actually make less on a monthly basis than you could ever find an apartment? So unless you have like a rental subsidy or a voucher, you're really struggling to find a place. And so you kind of see what we're seeing now, which is an increase in our, for folks that are experiencing homelessness, a increase on the folks that are experiencing first-time homelessness. Our biggest growing population within the homeless kind of subpopulations are elderly, people above the age of 55. Of course, when you retire, that becomes a fixed income. So really that rental increase has been a big issue in the last couple of years. We're also seeing, along with wages, we're also seeing expenses of property management. So when we start talking about developing affordable housing, some of that expense to cash flow a development is property management companies. Who you pay your rent to, who takes care of the property. They are experiencing expense increases, whether they have to increase their wages for their workers, maintenance that costs more, materials for upkeep costs more. They feed that back to their tenants. And so when those costs increase, the cost for housing and rentals also increase. So that's becoming an issue more and more. There was actually a meeting this morning about it. We're trying to figure out how to work within that and those increases, because that's out of our control. We had several inflation increases that we've dealt with, and actually that stabilized. So although we saw a spike in construction materials and just kind of anything to build, brick and mortar, sticks to build a development, those have kind of leveled off, thank goodness. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, issues beyond our control, which is hard sometimes because you just don't know what the market's going to bring you from day to day.
Yeah, I know you mentioned about after COVID you saw a large spike and increase. What do you think?
Oh, you went in and out.
Oh, for during COVID, you talked about how there was an increase in, after COVID, there was an increase in price and a large one with that. Why do you think that happened during COVID?
Not really sure, because we weren't the only city that saw it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not exactly what I want to say cause. So there's a couple things you can think of, right? So when more people started working at home, people started moving around, and people said, oh, I can live here, live there. And so some developers thought, well, wait, if you're going to work from home, I can charge you a little bit more. You're not having to go back and forth from work. And so very slowly, across the nation, we saw these increases. Now, what exactly drove Lexington to have such large increases? I don't think we have ever figured that out. But once the market started to move. The market moved. Now, luckily, it righted itself a little bit. We saw some increases at the beginning, or some decreases at the beginning of this year with rent. It has pretty much, for the most part, stabilized. So hopefully, we're over that hump, and now we have kind of a new price point that we can deal with, and we won't see those big increases. But I don't think anybody's ever pinpointed exactly why. Lexington, in particular, saw such massive increases so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've touched on this a little bit, but if you could speak a bit more on some of the specific efforts that are being made to increase access to affordable housing, not just in Lexington, but also elsewhere in the state, that would be perfect.
Yeah, so here in Lexington, we've had an affordable housing fund since 2014. So we have invested as a city, so as a city government, we have invested about $47 million into about 3,500 units of affordable housing. And when we say affordable housing, what we mean is that we serve folks that are income eligible at 80% area median income and below. That changes every year. So our area median income in 2014 looks very different than it does in 2024. But no matter what, we invest in units that will always be, for the next at least 15 years, for those folks that their income as a household is 80% or less area median income. So we've invested a lot. We've leveraged a lot of dollars. So we've taken that $47 million and leveraged about $444 million in other funding sources. And that is kind of a lot of those other funding sources are private, but there's also what we call LIHTC. And I'm sure if you have looked into affordable housing at all, low-income housing tax credits are a very common way for developers to fund affordable housing development. So a lot of that $444 million is in LIHTC, and that's a federal program, and it's highly competitive sometimes. But one or two of those developments for Lexington, working closely with our developers and Kentucky Housing Corporation. We try to make those work at least one or two times a year, just because those are much larger developments, usually 50, you're talking 50 to 150, 200 units. So that's very helpful. But LIHTC is a federal program. Most recently, the state, if you feel free to Google it. The Legislative Research Commission puts it on their YouTube page, but you can go back and this state legislator just finished up a housing task force subcommittee and looking at not just Lexington, but affordable housing across the state. I think everybody has acknowledged that even though maybe Lexington and Louisville and other large cities have had an affordable housing crisis for a long time, if you look at the data now, kind of coming out of the pandemic, every single city and every single county in Kentucky now have affordable housing issues. Everybody lacks enough affordable housing. And when we talk about that number, that's really across the board. So I always tell people I live in affordable housing. And they talk about like the definition of affordable housing. I told you a little bit earlier, we invest at 80% and below, but everybody should be able to live in affordable housing. Anytime you get a mortgage, your bank is going to say, can you afford it? Meaning, is it affordable to you? So I happen to have a mortgage and live in affordable housing. Across the state and in Lexington, we are seeing across the board issues with housing stock for everybody. Whether you make $500,000, $200,000, whatever your household brings in, there is limits to the access you have to affordable housing at all income levels. Of course, it gets a lot worse as your income decreases. Your likelihood of finding affordable housing also decreases. But in Lexington, I think right now, I say that right now, we're about 22,000 units of affordable housing short. And that is rental and home ownership, and that is across all incomes. So we're pretty short across the board. Now, like I said, 14,000 of that is for incomes that we would serve. That's a pretty big hole that we're kind of sitting in coming out of that pandemic, but it's across the board in all areas of Kentucky. not unique just to Lexington anymore.
So, that buying a home can be a very daunting and expensive process, especially for first-time buyers. What programs or initiatives are in place to support new home buyers?
So there's a lot of nonprofit, not a lot of nonprofits. There's several nonprofits here in Fayette County that can help first-time home buyers or home buyers that maybe are on a more limited income. So Urban League, always, we talk about Urban League, does affordable home ownership reach. It's just capital REACH. They do affordable home ownership. You can always talk to Habitat. Habitat is known. I mean, that's what they do. That's their bread and butter. They build affordable units for home ownership. We have another one, Community Ventures. Sorry. Community Ventures is another one that looks at first-time home buyers, and I say first-time home buyers, not even really first-time home buyers, but if you're interested in buying a home and you know that maybe your credit isn't the best or your income is pretty low, there are 4 different agencies just right there that you can kind of reach out to and start the process, because it is very, very daunting. It's daunting for people that aren't 80% and below, or even what we consider workforce, which is 120% AMI and below. It can be very overwhelming if you've never done it and you don't really have the support system outside. I always tell people, go talk to your bank. That's another great place to start. There's always someone. If you bank somewhere, they always have a mortgage officer who is more than willing to walk you through that process of what financing looks like, what options you have, and can kind of direct you maybe on next steps.
I know we covered this a little earlier, but for home prices across the country continue to rise, making it incredibly difficult for many people to afford homes or even rent them. What strategies are being implanted in Kentucky to help those struggling with affordability?
And I think as far as Kentucky is concerned, I think that's what that Housing Task Force Subcommittee is really looking at right now. Mm-hmm. So if you all want to research, you can go to Kentucky Housing Corporation's website and download that huge Bowen, I think it's a 500-ish page report, but it's chocked full of amazing information about the rental and housing market here in Kentucky. And I think that's, we'll let the state legislators look at it, and I know they've gotten a lot of good feedback about next steps and what we should do across the board, whether it's working on just getting the supplies in the market, just getting houses built. Like I said, we're at an affordable housing shortage across the board for all incomes. So getting a better handle on what we should build. There's an idea that maybe those single family homes with, the big yard and maybe that's not what people really want anymore. Maybe people want smaller. So kind of looking at a state level, what should we be building? To match maybe the households, or do households kind of become generational households, especially for my age group, who I have an 8-year-old, but I also have aging parents, and probably here very soon I need to merge those two, and kind of what does that house look like for me, and can I find that in the open market? So it'll be very interesting to see where it goes in the next probably 6 months, the next session, but I know it's being looked at in a very serious and intentional manner, which is good.
I don't think this has been touched on too much yet. If you could tell us if there are some common misconceptions about housing in the housing market that you think should be addressed.
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception about affordable housing. And I've always said that there's a common misconception about, those that experience homelessness. And we're coming out of those myths for those that experience homelessness. And I think eventually, hopefully, we'll kind of come out of the myths about affordable housing. I think some people think affordable housing, they just more think of old school. And this is like referencing the 80s, when we built high rise and I think there's just this idea that it just means poor, lazy, and again, these are myths. And I wish people would understand that right now our situation is very, very different. Affordable housing can, for us, is your teachers, your police officers, your cleaning staff at UK hospitals. So you go have a baby, the person who comes in to help you clean your room, I mean, they probably are income qualified to live in affordable housing. And so it is this working, it is a force problem too. Trying to think of how to explain this, but I wish people would see affordable housing more for what it is. We all need it, and it's not, and we don't have enough of it. And it is truly across the board. It is your firefighter. It's I mean, let's just be honest. When you call 911, it's your 911 operator. Like, these are the people that we're actually serving in our units. I think people are really shocked to see what people do for occupations that are in the units that we invest in. You know, we do compliance all the time and see that they're just working. You'd be single parents. I don't think people realize how many single parents we have in our units that we've invested in. These are one income households. It's tough to make life work on two. You know, so if you're a single parent making $15, $17, $18 an hour, the living wage here in Fayette County is moving up into 23, 24, 25 dollars an hour. And so if you're making 18, you're not making a living wage to live here in Fayette County. So especially if you're a single mom or single dad and you have to pay for childcare, it just kind of, so I want people to know that when you think of affordable housing, you have to really think about everybody that operates in our community. It's everybody that serves you food at a restaurant. They can income qualify. It's everybody that kind of works behind the scenes in our government center, in the hospitals. Like, that's who it is. And so I kind of want to get out of this, what we call NIMBY, not in my backyard. I want people to understand that they're not allowing a police officer to live behind them because they have this very old school idea of what affordable housing is. And so we're trying to get folks to realize that nowadays it is just everybody. And it's the people you work with on a daily basis. You don't know their financial situation, but I can guarantee you with some of the incomes and our living wage and what's expected here in Fayette County and how much child care costs, and you still have to pay for your kid to go to public school, that still costs money, which people are usually surprised about. As a parent, you know how much money it costs to have my kid go to public school. You know, that's changed since I was in school. So all of that stuff into consideration. I just want people to realize that it's just everybody. It's just anybody and everybody.
I think I have one final question. So us as high school students, and we'll be showing this to other high school students, what is something that you'd want to tell high school students about affordable housing, or if people are wanting to get involved into this field?
So if you want to get involved, especially if you're in high school and kind of just want to get a sense of affordable housing, I would go volunteer. Go volunteer at Habitat. That's probably the best place to start to kind of see almost the behind the scenes of how affordable housing. You can always intern for an affordable housing developer, just to kind of see. It's just it kind of debunks some of those myths and kind of gives you a better understanding of the finances behind affordable housing and what it goes into actually building a home or building an apartment or building a townhouse. And then start looking around your community, where you live. And I tell people this a lot. Where would you think affordable housing could go? Who could you network with? Who do you know? Who could you have on this podcast that you could say, hey, there's this lot at the corner of such and such and such and such. And I think that would be a great place for affordable housing. Just keeping your eyes and ears open, kind of removing those barriers to building affordable housing all across our city. And again, those myths of affordable housing just being in pockets or, well, that's just over there. Affordable housing needs to be across all of our city. for equity and for access. So keeping your eyes and ears open about who's building, where they're building, your thoughts on who they should be, where they should be building. There's a couple big developers, but I always say everybody knows at least one landlord, and all it takes is one landlord to say, I want to do affordable housing. That's all it takes. We have some little landlords that do just 4 little units, and then we have massive scare developers that are, across the state and other states that they have 87 developments of affordable housing. Anybody that wants to give back and kind of get in this line of work to preserve their community, to keep people in their community, so that people don't have to move or have to give up their support systems. Communities thrive when everybody has access to resources that they need. So that would be my thoughts. Volunteer. Always find some place to volunteer. Call, see what they need. But I know a lot of Reach, Habitat, Urban League. Get involved with organizations, nonprofits that do affordable housing. Kind of get an inside look at it.
Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned in that for developers are for doing old buildings kind of stuff. Is there any, like, by the state working to renovate older buildings that have either been abandoned or just not being used anymore to create affordable housing there?
Yeah, so there's a couple different options that you can use. I talked about LIHTC, which is the low-income housing tax credit. There's also a different program that does historical tax credits. We actually have a project in the development phase that will use historic tax credits. So yeah, you can. There's a building on MLK here in town that's actually very historic, and they're going to rehab it into apartment units. So I always tell people, if you see a building, if you see a piece of land, there's always potential. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to use your imagination more than others. But our planning department and our zoning folks have kind of really worked hard over the last 10 years to have inclusive zoning for the development of affordable housing. So our zoning looks a little different than some other cities. We allow a little bit more density when it comes to affordable housing developments. So that's always nice. So it's sometimes you can look at a piece of property and say 5 years ago, the only thing that could go there was a single family home. And now you can actually look at it and say, okay, maybe I put townhomes on this and do home ownership, and sell condos or townhomes. So I think right now Lexington has a chance to be pretty creative with our abandoned and maybe forgotten properties that have just been kind of left to sit because folks don't know really what to do with it. I think we're at a point where people can be creative and come up with some ideas.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We'd like to thank you so much for talking to us and taking the time to share your insight on the subject with us so we're able to spread it and inform other people.
Yeah, and I highly encourage get a hold of some developers here in town that do affordable housing. There's several. I won't drop any names, but you can Google and find some and have them on, and they can give you the sense of why they do what they do and kind of what drives them. There's some really, really good people out here doing affordable housing, trying to keep their communities vibrant and alive, and I appreciate it every day. But thank you for having me on. This has been fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking your time out of the day to speak with us.
No problem. Please let me know if you need anything else.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Welcome back. Well, that was a really insightful interview. She had tons of good points, and it's amazing how they've already invested $43 million into affordable housing. What are your guys' thoughts?
They were able to turn that into, what was it, $400 million?
I don't remember.
It was some large sum of money.
Mm-hmm. And with their task force, it's always seeing how they can do stuff, and with even rent coming out where you're supposed to do like 30% of your income into that. Now it's becoming more expensive because the rent is now more than their paychecks, and it's crazy about how that is. And even with how many people are involved in affordable housing, how she talked about police officers, teachers, or not police officers, not just police officers, but also the people who 911 operators, that's what they call firefighters, the janitors at UK Hospital. There's so many people involved in affordable housing, and it's a lot of the stuff I never would have even thought about.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it is really interesting, her point on, like, how prevalent a lot of the biases people have had since, since the 80s when that was kind of the case. How many of those biases continue on today and, like you said, prevent normal, hardworking people from being able to afford the house they live in.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting to talk about for with the rising after COVID. One thing I never would thought about is that I knew materials were increasing. I wasn't really truly sure about why they're increasing. Maybe it's people were in jobs, people were losing, whatever that was. People weren't really in their houses. But would have never thought one of the things incorporated into that was people work from home, because if sellers are increasing the rent just because you work from home and you're not spending money on driving, people may think that, oh, it's going to be better for me because I'm not going to be driving, so it'll be fine. Yet also, what about the people who don't work from home? It's crazy how a lot of different things do come into effect in these different stuff.
It's also just disturbing how that works. Just the constantly raised prices of housing across the country is extremely disturbing. Being over people's incomes,
or even rent. How, like she was saying before, it was like 500, and now it's like 1,000, which is like doubling the whole thing. And it's just showing how we're losing affordable housing. And as she said, across the country, we're losing affordable housing. We do not have enough. And with there's a lot of homeless population increasing, and all these different aspects affecting housing. It's crazy how it happens, but I am very happy with what Lexington is doing with investing money, not just for themselves, but for the people in the city.
And we still have so much more to do with that, as Polly Ruddock said. Mm-hmm. We are down 22,000 units. We need that much more to be able to sustain the population of the city.
And we'll keep growing, because just based on our neighbors, which is Georgetown, there's the Toyota plant right there, which is already increasing and growing, and they have 10,000 employees just on the line. And I know in the future they'll be working on electronic cars, so they're probably even going to have even more employees there. So with that and growing, I know Georgetown's prices are increasing. Yet also, that's also I feel like going to incorporate into Lexington with a lot of employees living in Lexington, just like my dad. So there's a lot of different aspects affecting everything, of course. But I'm really happy with what Lexington is doing and everything for it. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think that Lexington is doing a very good job of trying to sustain affordable housing and make it accessible to all people who need it. Not just people who are thought to need it, but they actually look at your income level and based on that, it's determined whether you are eligible to be in these affordable housing units.
I am also really happy with their task force, how they're looking not just at land, but also in non-occupied buildings anymore, more historical buildings, to be able to convert those into homes so people are able to live in. And I feel like that would not just create more homes, but also create a better environment in different areas. Because instead of having 10 homes that are abandoned and just getting overgrown by weeds and everything, they're now occupied by families and able to not just grow the population, but also grow the economy. Because with more houses, with more people working, that brings more money in, that keeps money increasing. Yeah. That's it. Any last thoughts?
Thank you all for tuning in to GovCast Episode 3. We'll see you next time.